It began just after midnight. The cold, clear skies over Moscow, usually a silent, dark expanse, suddenly came alive with the distinct low hum of unseen engines. At 47 minutes past midnight, Russian radar operators saw what they had long feared, but perhaps never truly expected. A swarm of low-altitude drones converging on the capital. The first explosions were not from impacts, but from interceptions. A bright flash tore through the darkness over the city's southern ring road, a testament to the air defenses springing into action. But this was not a single isolated threat. It was the opening act of a meticulously coordinated assault, a wave of small, determined machines intent on piercing the heart of the Russian Federation. The city's residents, jolted from their sleep, looked to the sky to see a terrifying light show. Within 10 minutes, the night was filled with the sounds of battle. The sharp cracks of surface-to-air missiles launching from hidden batteries were followed by the deep, resonant booms of aerial detonations. Tracers from anti-aircraft guns stitched fiery patterns across the sky as defenders desperately tried to swat the incoming drones. This first wave was designed to do one thing: saturate the defenses. By presenting dozens of targets at once, the attack overwhelmed the systems designed to protect Russia's most important city. The initial assault was a test, a probing attack that revealed the gaps and strained the capabilities of Moscow's vaunted air defense shield, making it vulnerable to what was coming next. Less than 2 hours later, the second wave arrived. This was a larger, more sophisticated force of long-range unmanned aerial vehicles, launched from multiple directions and covering a front of nearly 1,000 kilometers. This was not a simple harassment raid. It was a full-scale paralysis effort. The drones flew low and fast, using the terrain to mask their approach, a tactic learned and perfected by studying Russian strikes on Ukraine. For the next 6 hours, Moscow was functionally under siege from the air. The city that had projected an image of untouchable power was now a sprawling, illuminated target, its defenses stretched to their breaking point by an enemy it had profoundly underestimated. The response on the ground was a mix of confusion and grim determination. Emergency alerts blared from phones, telling citizens to stay away from windows and seek shelter. Debris from intercepted drones and spent interceptor missiles rained down across the sprawling metropolis, clattering onto rooftops and shattering windows. One piece of shrapnel landed on a deserted road near the Kremlin walls, a symbolic breach of the sanctuary that Moscow was supposed to represent. The myth of the capital's invulnerability was being dismantled piece by piece, explosion by explosion, in the freezing December air, broadcast live for the entire world to witness. This attack did not happen in a vacuum. It was a direct, calculated response to the brutal campaign Russia had waged against Ukraine's own infrastructure. For weeks leading up to this night, Russia had intensified its aerial bombardment, launching over 1,500 drones and hundreds of missiles at Ukrainian cities. The goal was clear: to break the will of the Ukrainian people by plunging them into darkness and cold. Russian strikes systematically targeted power stations, heating plants, and port facilities, causing widespread brownouts and killing civilians in their homes. In Chernihiv and Odessa, people died as their apartment buildings and port workplaces were hit, a grim reminder of the human cost of Russia's strategy. Ukraine, however, did not seek to mirror Russia's indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas. Instead, it studied them. Ukrainian military planners analyzed Russian radar patterns, identified gaps in air defense coverage, and noted the logistical strains caused by their enemies' relentless but predictable tactics. They learned where Russia's defenses were strongest and, more importantly, where they were weakest. The Ukrainian response was designed not for terror, but for psychological and logistical impact. The objective was to strike at the symbolic and functional heart of the Russian state, demonstrating a reach and capability that Moscow believed was impossible. The attack on the capital was timed to deliver a powerful message during diplomatic talks, showing that Kyiv had leverage. The core of Ukraine's strategy was asymmetry. Russia relied on expensive, powerful missiles and a massive, but finite, inventory of air defense interceptors. Each Russian Pantsir missile, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, was being used to shoot down a Ukrainian drone that cost a fraction of that price. Ukraine's plan was to exploit this economic imbalance, forcing Russia to expend its most valuable defensive assets on cheap, mass-produced drones. By launching them in swarms, Ukraine ensured that even if most were shot down, the cost to Russia would be immense, and some would inevitably get through to their intended targets. Russia's defense ministry put on a brave face, issuing statements that claimed overwhelming success. They reported shooting down 111 Ukrainian drones in just 3 hours, with another 11 downed on their approach to Moscow. The day before, they had claimed to have intercepted between 141 and 170 drones. But these figures, meant to project strength, inadvertently revealed a deep vulnerability. The sheer quantity of incoming threats highlighted the immense strain on Russia's air defense network. The Kremlin was being forced to burn through its precious and limited stockpile of advanced interceptors to counter a threat that was cheap, relentless, and seemingly inexhaustible. As the drones filled the skies, life on the ground in Moscow ground to a halt. The city's three major airports, Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Vnukovo, suspended all operations indefinitely. The rhythmic flow of arrivals and departures that connected Russia's capital to the world was severed in an instant. Runways that were usually bustling with activity fell silent, their lights dimmed as a precaution. On departure boards, every flight was marked as delayed or cancelled, leaving thousands of travelers with no information and nowhere to go. The attack had effectively turned the sprawling metropolis into an isolated island, cutting it off from the outside world. Inside the terminals, chaos gave way to a tense and weary resignation. Over 12,000 passengers were stranded, their journeys abruptly interrupted. Families slept on floors, business travelers tried desperately to find a working Wi-Fi signal, and airport staff struggled to manage the growing crowds and shrinking resources. Cellular networks across the city were strained to the breaking point, overwhelmed by a flood of calls and data, as millions of residents tried to contact loved ones or get news updates. The digital infrastructure that underpinned modern urban life began to buckle under the pressure of a city under direct attack. The disruption extended far beyond the airports. The normally vibrant and bustling streets of Moscow became eerily quiet as people stayed indoors, heeding official warnings. The city's elaborate public transport system, usually a model of efficiency, saw service interruptions as authorities closed certain metro stations and rerouted bus lines to avoid areas where debris was falling. The attack altered the fundamental rhythm of the city, replacing the predictable hum of daily life with an atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty. Moscow, a city that prided itself on order and control, was experiencing a profound and unsettling loss of both. For Muscovites, the night was a jarring awakening. For years, the war had been something distant, a conflict fought by professional soldiers on faraway battlefields, visible only through the sanitized lens of state television. Now, the war was here. It was the sound of explosions overhead, the flicker of anti-aircraft fire seen from apartment windows, and the tangible fear that the next impact could be closer. The psychological barrier that had insulated the capital from the realities of the conflict had been shattered. The sense of security that had defined life in Moscow was gone, replaced by the chilling realization that nowhere was truly safe anymore. While the world's attention was fixed on the spectacle of Moscow under aerial assault, Ukraine's strategy unfolded with devastating precision across Russia's industrial heartland. The attack on the capital was, well, a masterful diversion, a way to focus and fix Russia's premier air defenses, while other, more critical targets were struck with near impunity. As the Kremlin scrambled its best systems to protect government buildings and elite residences, swarms of drones and long-range missiles bypassed the thinned-out defenses in the regions. They were aimed not at symbols, but at the very engines of the Russian war machine, its industrial and energy infrastructure. The strikes hit with surgical accuracy. In Russia's industrial belt, chemical plants producing fertilizer and explosive precursors were targeted, disrupting key supply chains for both agriculture and munitions manufacturing. Power stations that fed electricity to heavy industry were disabled, causing factory assembly lines to fall silent. In the Krasnodar region, a Ukrainian drone slammed into the port of Temryuk, a critical hub for fuel exports. Two massive petroleum tanks erupted in flames, sending a thick column of black smoke into the sky from a fire that engulfed an area of nearly 2,000 square meters, visible for miles. The pain was not limited to drone strikes. In the Rostov region, the Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery, a major supplier of fuel to the Russian military, was hit by what was claimed to be a Storm Shadow missile. The resulting explosions and fires crippled a significant portion of its production capacity. Each of these attacks was carefully chosen to create a disproportionate impact, degrading Russia's ability to sustain its war effort and its economy. Ukraine was demonstrating that it could reach deep into Russian territory and inflict damage that would be felt for months, long after the fires were extinguished. The timing of these attacks compounded their effect. They came as a harsh Russian winter was beginning to set in. The disruption of power stations did not just halt industrial production. It led to catastrophic heating failures in surrounding residential areas. With temperatures plummeting below -15 degrees Celsius, pipes in entire apartment blocks began to freeze and rupture, leaving thousands of ordinary Russian citizens without heat or running water. Hospitals were forced to switch to overburdened backup generators, and emergency services were swamped with calls from people suffering from the bitter cold. The war, once a distant abstraction, was now a frozen pipe in the kitchen. The coordinated drone assault exposed a fundamental flaw in Russia's military posture, thrusting the Kremlin into an agonizing strategic dilemma. For years, Moscow had been protected by a dense, multi-layered air defense network considered one of the most formidable in the world. This created a bubble of security that allowed the country's leadership to project power abroad without fearing consequences at home. But the night the drones arrived, that bubble burst. The attack proved that a determined and resourceful adversary could saturate and penetrate even the most heavily fortified airspace, leaving the political and military leadership vulnerable. This new reality forced an impossible choice upon Russian commanders: protect the capital or protect the front lines. The advanced air defense systems, such as the S-400 and Pantsir, were a finite resource. Every battery redeployed to create a denser, more resilient shield around Moscow was a battery taken away from the battlefield in Ukraine. Leaving the capital exposed was politically unthinkable, as it would shatter the regime's image of strength and control. But thinning out defenses at the front would grant Ukrainian forces greater freedom of action in the air, jeopardizing Russian troops and logistical hubs. The raids did more than just strain military resources. They eroded the carefully constructed myth of Moscow's invulnerability. State propaganda had long portrayed the war as a special military operation happening far from Russia's core, a narrative that insulated the general population from its true costs. The sight of air defenses firing over the capital and debris falling near the Kremlin directly contradicted this story. It demonstrated to every Russian citizen that the war was not contained. It could reach them in their homes, disrupt their lives, and turn their sense of security into a memory. Ultimately, the drones brought the war home. For the first time, the conflict was no longer a distant affair fought by contract soldiers and conscripts in the fields of Ukraine. It was a direct and present threat to daily life inside Russia itself. The choice between heating a provincial city or defending a military base, between protecting the Kremlin or holding a trench, became a stark reality. The attacks transformed the conflict from a foreign policy adventure into a domestic crisis, forcing Russian society to confront the consequences of a war it had, until now, only been willing to watch from a distance. The front line was no longer just at the border, it was now everywhere.